Yo! Welcome back to One More Mana. My name's Derek, and today I'm coming at you guys with another deck tech from one of the legendary creatures from M20, and this one is on Gargos, Vicious Watcher. Gargos is a 6 mana, 8/7 with Vigilance, but obviously the rest of the text is where it gets really interesting. So that first ability that your Hydras cost 4 or less is amazing because so many Hydras are X spells. They have X in their casting cost. So essentially that 4 discount is just going to get put straight into that X, meaning you can get high X values while putting less mana in, which is amazing. And then the next ability is just so cool, so unique, and it's something that just seems really interesting. And it's whenever any creature you control becomes the target of a spell, so it's not spell or ability, only the target of a spell, doesn't matter who cast it, then Gargos gets to fight a creature that you don't control. He doesn't have to. Gargos doesn't have to fight. It's up to 1. So this just seems awesome. As an 8/7, essentially this is going to mean when you target your own creatures, you're just picking off creatures left and right. So with this second ability, first of all, it doesn't care which of your creatures get targeted. It can be any of your creatures. And then Gargos is going to get to fight something. And if you use this correctly, you could essentially, it's almost a little mini board wipe. If you can keep targeting your creatures, you can keep just picking off creatures you don't want on the board. And when you have this continuous removal spell, and a lot of these targeting spells are pretty cheap to cast, that can get dangerous. And it feels, it's mono green, but we're going to be able to control the board in a way that is just awesome. So the way I put this deck together is I want to take advantage of both of those abilities. When I first started building it, I almost just tried to stuff all the Hydras I could in, try to go like 25 Hydras and just take, ramp everything out and see what happens. But I wanted to be able to, that second ability just really interested me, and I wanted to get a little bit of both. And with Hydras, you're not concerned about trying to cast 5 Hydras in a turn. You want to just dump all your mana into 1 Hydra. So running in this deck, maybe, 10, 15 Hydras might be all you really need, and the rest of the deck should be focused around ramping to the biggest X's possible. And then mixing in a lot of, cheap targeting spells to act as removal, essentially, with our commander. So looking at the creatures, we're running a lot of creatures, and a good chunk of them are Hydras. I want to kind of go through first, highlight some of my favorite Hydras, and then show some of the creatures we use to supplement them. So the first one is, I love this card, it's Hungering Hydra. This is a relatively new Hydra, and it is so powerful. Especially because we have so many ways to give it trample. We'll get to that later. But Hungering Hydra is green and X, and then it gets all these, whatever X is, all those +1 counters can only be blocked by 1 creature, and whenever it's dealt damage, it gains that many +1 counters. The only thing stopping this creature from being completely broken is its lack of trample, and like I said, we're going to get back to that. Another one I just love is Mistcutter Hydra. This thing is insane. So first of all, it can't be countered. It gets haste, and it gets protection from blue. This card is insane in so many ways. I actually ran a Hydra Tribal deck a while back, and this was one of the most, if not the most powerful one in it, because first of all, when you're dumping all your mana into something, you don't want it to be able to get countered, and this stops that. But even better, it has haste. So you can have an empty board state, and if you have access to a lot of mana, if at any point someone has just blue creatures or has no creatures up, dump all your mana, make a massive creature, swing and take them out. It is... being able to get a massive hasty creature like that out of nowhere with the protection to boot, it's really powerful. This next one is also awesome. It's the Scourge of Skull of Vale. This is so cool. So this is a Hydra that already has trample, but that's not even the coolest part about it. I mean, it is useful, obviously. But you can tap it and sack another creature, and then when you sack that creature, you put +1 counters onto this creature equal to that creature's toughness. And this is great, because essentially you're going to get value. If you have a bunch of big Hydras, and someone tries to take, let's say you get, that Hungering Hydra, and it's massive, and someone goes and tries to take it out, in response you can sack it, just take all those +1 counters, throw it onto this one. Essentially it's just letting you transfer the +1 counters, and having that sack outlet is always so helpful. We don't want to invest all our mana, make a giant Hydra, and let somebody steal it. No, that's not, we don't want to be getting smacked by our own Hydras. This lets us make sure that doesn't happen, and still get the value of keeping those +1 counters on our own creatures. And then the last one I'm going to talk about is Voracious Hydra, another one from M20. This is so cool. So when it enters, you can choose to either double those +1 counters, essentially doubling your X, or have it fight something. And this utility is great. If there's some target on the board, play it, fight something, get rid of whatever that threat is, and if not, you just enter with so many +1 counters. And I started to look through the deck list. There's some Hydras that you might think are more powerful, some of your favorites. Probably some of the more popular ones I kind of left out. These just happen to be the Hydras that I like the most, that are just some of my personal favorites. Now, how are we going to take advantage of all these Hydras? The number one way for me is you need to give them trample. You need trample. And the three best ways in my mind to do that are Brawn, Nylea, God of the Hunt, and Ronus the Indomitable. These are amazing. Brawn just needs to be in the graveyard for all your stuff to have trample, and Nylea gives just everything trample, and Ronus allows you to pump things and give them trample. And those two are indestructible. These are so hard to get rid of. Once you get one of these out, or where their trample's in your graveyard, unless they have an exiling effect of the graveyard, or unless they have a way to exile these two gods, they're going to stick around. You're going to keep giving things trample, and when you make these giant Hydras, they're not going to be able to chump block for long, and especially something like, that Hungering Hydra I just talked about. That with trample, it gets scary, and all of a sudden you start getting 10/10s and bigger with these just huge, just piles of +1 counters on these Hydras. And when chump blocking doesn't work, and especially with our commander that's going to be able to fight things to remove creatures so people aren't going to have a ton of blockers, that damage is going to get through fast. And the last creature I'm going to talk about, this doesn't fit into a specific category other than just being awesome in this deck, and it's Vigor. Vigor is insane. Essentially, when any of your creatures take damage, you prevent that damage and instead place that many +1 counters on them. This is ridiculous. For one, with your commander when it's fighting stuff, well, forget it taking damage, you're going to throw +1 counters on it. And then, when people try blocking your creatures, again, just throw +1 counters on your stuff, and that's what we want to do. This card is ridiculous. And how does it only cost? I get it's triple green, but only 6 mana for this? This card is insane. Looking at the enchantments, the first one I want to talk about are Greater Good and Death's Presence. Essentially, the whole theme of these two cards is getting value off of our giant creatures if anything happens to them. With Death's Presence, if one of our huge creatures dies, almost all of our biggest creatures are Hydras with +1 counters. It lets us put those +1 counters somewhere else and keep the value, so we didn't just lose that huge mana investment we made. And with Greater Good, if someone tries to kill one of those huge creatures, just sack it and draw a whole bunch of cards, and we're really not that mad in that exchange. And the last enchantment I have to talk about, because it's a new card and it's too perfect, it's Unbound Flourishing. This is just the Hydra card. It's just going to double all our X values. Unbound Flourishing, I guess it's just going to function as basically a 3 mana doubler for us, because all those X values just get doubled. And if people are thinking, I can chump block, like I said, we got those trample enablers, it can get scary fast. Really, it's going to do the same thing Doubling Season's going to do for our Hydras, and for 3 mana, and a whole lot less cash too. Looking at the instance, we have a whole bunch of just either combat tricks or just random targeting spells. I won't go through all of them, but a lot of the instances are just, 1 or 2 mana, target creature gets hexproof, or target creature gets plus this. And really it's just fighting enablers. This is going to allow our commander to fight creatures and just pick off threats that we see. Normally, these type of combat tricks aren't stuff you run in Commander, really, unless you're running an Infect deck, but because of that fight mechanic, essentially these cards just turn into really cheap removal spells. The next one I'm going to talk about is Solidarity of Heroes. This card is ridiculous. Solidarity of Heroes is so good. It's again that doubling effect. We already talked about the Doubling Season and the Unbound Flourishing. Well, this is a cheaper version of trying to do that. You're doubling your +1 counters on all your Hydras for 2 mana, and for another 2 mana for each target. And again, target, meaning those are all triggers you can get on your commander to fight things, and doubling your +1 counters, making giant creatures, and wiping out your opponent's creatures all on one card. And for not that much mana for the effect that it has. Looking at the artifacts, the first one I'm talking about is Glaring Spotlight. This card is so good because we want to fight things. We want to be able to fight our opponent's creatures, and if they have hexproof, makes it a whole lot more difficult. But with this, forget about hexproof. They're playing Narset, not a big deal. Our Hydra's about to eat that Narset. Doesn't matter. This card is amazing, and it is so powerful, and that's not even the whole effect, because you can pay 1 and sack it to give all our own creatures hexproof and unblockable. This card is perfect. You put it down, you stop your opponents from having hexproof, and at the opportune moment when you have all those giant Hydras, sack it, swing with the team of hexproof unblockable creatures, and see who survives. See if anybody's left after that. And the last artifact I'm going to talk about is Scythe of the Wretched. This is a super cool card. You can put it on our commander, have it fight stuff, kill it, and then bring those cards back under our control. Now, unfortunately, we'll reattach to those creatures that we're bringing back, so we will have to keep reattaching it to our commander. But to me, that's worth it. 4 mana to reattach it to our commander to just steal a creature, essentially. I'll take that any day. Looking at the sorceries, this first one, Biogenic Upgrade, is ridiculous. So you get to pick up to 3 creatures to distribute 3 +1 counters on. Seems okay. But then you get to double the amount of +1 counters on each of those target creatures, and it's targeting 3 creatures. Meaning, all those triggering our commander. We get to get all those triggers on our commander, fight everything. You get those Hydras. If you have 3 Hydras out, you just throw them +1 counters. Just take a whole handful and just throw it on top of it and see what happens. Just close your eyes, throw +1 counters on those creatures. This is going to be insane. And then your commander gets to keep fighting things. It's just a lot of these cards, and it's crazy how it works. It's essentially just making your creatures bigger, getting rid of your opponent's blockers, and really just making it real scary. Because if at any point they run out of chump blockers or you get that trample enabler, people can die fast. And another one I'm going to talk about is Soul's Majesty. I love this one so much because it's going to do, again, everything. It has that multiple effect. It's everything we want it to be. First of all, you're going to draw a whole bunch of cards because we're going to have a lot of big Hydras. And it's going to let you draw cards equal to target creature's power. But because we're targeting, we're also getting to fight with our commander. So this card goes from draw a bunch of cards for 5 mana to draw a bunch of cards and destroy whatever creature you want on your opponent's side of the board. Yeah, that's pretty good. Look at the Planeswalkers. The only one we're going to run is Nissa, who shakes the world. It's a mana doubler. We get to make our lands into elementals with +1 counters, so all that synergy there. Even just as a mana doubler in a mono green deck, I feel like you want to be running this Nissa. Look at the lands. We're running 37 lands, mostly just basic forest, nothing super fancy here. I will say the only 2 that I would really talk about. One is Rogue's Passage. When you have these huge creatures, you do want to be able to give them evasion, and being able to give a giant Hydra unblockable for 4 mana seems pretty legit. And then outside of that, the only other one will be Nykthos. I've talked about this card a lot. In any monocolored deck you want to run it. But the thing with Hydras is a lot of them have a lot of green mana symbols, so your devotion can be crazy. Alright, so that's going to do it with all the categories. Now we're going to get into this best part, the game-winning step. How are we winning the game? Obviously by smacking people with Hydras, but specifically, how are we going to smack it? Now the number one way to win with this deck is Overwhelming Stampede. This card is ridiculous. I mentioned we have a lot of creatures and we have a lot of Hydras. And the thing that's cool with Hydras is, early game, if you need blockers, if you just need creatures out, you don't have to pay a ton into X. You can pay a little bit, and you might have a few little Hydras. But with Overwhelming Stampede, if those stick around and you get a big Hydra, you cast Overwhelming Stampede, all of a sudden that big Hydra is essentially acting as a massive anthem for everything and giving them all trample. This is exactly what we want. A lot of cards can fit this category. A lot of, times Craterhoof fits this, but we're going for a bunch, we're going for big creatures more so than a ton of creatures. So maybe a Pathbreaker Ibex, or like I said, the Overwhelming Stampede, maybe even a Triumph for the Hordes. Kind of see what fits your deck best, kind of mix and match. For this deck, I felt like this was good enough because a lot of the time the Hydras by themselves can do so much damage. But, mix and match, see which one of those win cons fits you best. But this category as a whole, the number one way to win. Second way I'm going to say to win is actually through your commander, and commander damage is actually a very viable way to win. As I've mentioned, we have a lot of effects that can transfer +1 counters. And on top of that, we have cards like Nylea and like Ronus that can buff your creatures. And with the insane amount of ramp in this deck, because it's monocolored, essentially all the mana we're making is green. If you just have an insane amount of mana and you have a Nylea on board, why not just dump it on that, make your commander massive and just take somebody out with 21? Because, I'm not always great at Madden, but 21 is less than 40. And your commander is always going to be scary, and it's always going to be a threat. And the fact that it's vigilance, you never have to worry about holding it back as a blocker. It's not the primary way to win, but with these ways, like I said, to distribute some of these +1 counters and doubling the +1 counters, your commander can get massive, and trying to take somebody out with it isn't a bad idea. And the last way to win the game really isn't super complicated. Just smack people with your Hydras. Smack everybody with Hydras. Every time you get, just smack people. Just play the Hydras and swing. That's really what this deck is all about. It's about controlling your opponent's board with the fight mechanic of your commander and smacking people with these Hydras. One particular Hydra we'll talk about that might be able to win the game even faster is Hydra Omnivore. This card, whenever you do combat damage to an opponent, it does that much to each other opponent. Meaning, if you can get a way to throw a bunch of +1 counters on this or buff it with one of those cards I just talked about, give it trample. This is a one swing, kill the whole table type of card potentially, and it is so amazing. So that's going to do it for this week's deck tech. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. I had a really good time building it. This is a pretty simple deck. Nothing too crazy going on. Really, it's just you're ramping a whole bunch. You throw all the ramp you can into a deck. Trying to play out some giant Hydras with a slight discount from your commander. Playing some combat tricks, getting in damage, fighting stuff, having a good time. It's a very, very green deck. And the thing is super cool because this is a core set too. The core sets are always designed to be a little bit simpler to bring new players in. And I think Gargos does an amazing job of that. And I think Gargos would be an amazing commander for a newer player. This deck can easily be built on a budget. Hydras aren't super expensive. Neither are combat tricks. And neither is just most sorcery-based ramp. So you can put together a really cool, strong, cheap deck it's pretty simple. You're ramping, playing big creatures, swinging. It's not super complicated, but I do think it's super fun. So I think this is a great starting point of all the deck techs I've done. If you're a newer player and you're thinking about getting in, you're kind of just, jumping around YouTube, trying to learn more, I think this is a great starting point to have a really fun, relatively simple deck to play that I think you'll have a really good time with. And y'all should let me know if we do have any newer players watching that are interested in having me put together a budget deck list of this. Please let me know down in the comments. I would love to sit down and kind of put together a more budget deck list for newer players. I think it's a great opportunity. Like I said, the more players that we can get, into Commander playing, the better. So I would love to be able to help some newer players out and kind of get them for a good starting point and into the format that we all just love so much. But yes, as always, a shout out to the patrons. We love y'all so much. Thank you for everything. And I hope you guys are excited about the next coming weeks because, again, I have more and more M20 legendary creatures coming at you guys. I hope y'all have fun at the pre-releases. If y'all had any cool stories or anything, let us know down below. But for now, I will see you guys next time.